Hans van Velde, who will speak on the topic of the European paradigm shift for employers. Hans is an entrepreneur, coach, and expert at People at Work, and founder of the European Brands at Work and board member of ADHD Europe. Hans, over to you.
Thank you. I'm absolutely delighted to be present at this conference, and I've enjoyed a lot all the lectures before. And I hope to share with you the vision of European Brains at Work on the paradigm shift that's going on amongst employers. Let me first introduce myself a bit more. I am Hans van de Velde from Rotterdam in Holland, and I have ADHD and dyslexia myself. I'm an entrepreneur since 32 years, and I coach employees for employers since 22 years now, mostly people with special brains. And next to that, I'm the chair of the science committee of the Dutch Association for People with ADHD, Dyslexia, etc. As Colman already told you, I'm board member of ADHD Europe, and I'm the founder of European Brains at Work. Why did we make European Brains at Work? Why did we start it? It was some 8 or 10 years ago that I realized that if an employee has a special brain, a neurodiverse brain, the employer has to have information and has to know how to not only handle the burden of it or the troubles or the complications of it, but also make proper use of these special brains. So it's of course because I'm an employer myself. I have had for 10 years in the 90s, I've had an IT company. And we had different kinds of people, but you know, in IT, special brains are really present. So had some experience before we all realized a lot about ADHD and autism. So, but I can understand the way an employer looks at the world. European Brains at Work is an international network of experts in the field of employees, all from their own experience. Some of them are coaches or a psychologist or just experienced with ADHD. And in fact, the only thing they do as an ambassador, they visit employers and talk at the same level about how are you doing with the special brains in your company. And for many employers, employer means HR advisor, company doctor, maybe the CEO or the manager. And for many employers, it's a surprise if you explain to them, well, you've got, let's say, 1,000 people working for you, and 10%, that means 100, have a special brain. And we define special brains, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, autism, and we also include giftedness. I think many of you will realize that an IQ above 130 can be mentioned a special brain as well. And we explained to them that that the best way to approach these employees to make use of this human capital. Our mission to them is, this is part of your human capital. You pay them every month, and your aim has to be, let's make use of them, profit from these brains with these special skills. So this is in fact the only thing. And then things happen. Some say, thank you for the conversation, and they go on with their lives. Others say, well, I have some with dyslexia. Can you organize a coach for them? And most of the time they ask for, can you do a presentation? Can you train our HR advisors, etc.? And then, of course, we have a more extended message for them. But first, before I proceed to these the things we tell employers, since we are in quite a scientific company here, I would like to make something clear. This is also the message of European brains at work. I'm talking about the paradigm shift. If we, you and I, if we first start to clean up our own language and try to avoid, when we look at scientific pictures like this is taken from, as you see here, an ADHD brain scan or something, and then you always see these are the disabilities, the disorders, the genetic anomalies. Realize what you're saying as a scientist if you talk about genetic anomaly. And then opposite of it, there are the healthy controls. I think many of you will know this wording. So what we try to promote is that we ourselves, this is you and me as we are here present, start using the right names, like property of the brain, the feature of the brain, or the characteristic of the brain. And it's very important, instead of talking about genetic anomalies, to talk about genetic variants. So if you want to change the world, start changing yourself and really look into your language. That's something I wanted to tell you first, because if you look here below, this is why I'm interested in a paradigm shift. I still am very much into Michel Foucault, a French philosopher who did a lot about power and the influence of influencing the discourse and the importance of language. And for those who are more philosophically or scientifically interested, I would advise you to read Michel Foucault. I've read Discipline and Punish in English, and in Dutch I've read Les mots et les choses. So, well, with dyslexia, this was quite a challenge, but I did it. And he inspired me that if we realize that we have agency, we, that is the people with ADHD, dyslexia, autism, etc., the special brains, the neurodiverse brains, if we realize that we have agency and we are capable of influencing the discourse and trying to make clear to, in this case, employers, that we give them another way to look at things, another way of talking about people with special brains, then things will run by themselves, will evolve. That's very important to realize. So I've been hearing some other percentages, but for the research I did on ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and giftedness together, it's about 10%. That's because of the overlap. A lot of people with dyslexia also have ADHD, or people with autism also have dyslexia. So if you count in overlap, but let's not get to in a discussion. If it's 12% or whatever, I'm fine. But what we tell to employers is 10% of your employees have a special brain, and what you're gonna do with it. Then in our discourse, we introduce, of course, biodiversity. Neurodiversity comes from biodiversity. And one of the most important messages is to give to anyone, employers also, that neurodiverse people are not a mistake of nature or something like that. They are there for a reason. In the global population, we have this 10% or maybe a bit more because they have added value. Like the value of people with ADHD who are very good in crisis management, like the crisis mechanic or the crisis manager. And a lot of people with autism are very good in details. When a person with ADHD starts with a new idea, it's mostly fantastic and enthusiastic, etc. But then they need people with autism to finish the job. I will show you in a minute a very specific way of looking at organizations from the 80s, which also includes this vision. Of course, don't misunderstand me. I'm talking about the special talents, but there has to be, don't overshoot it. There has to be a balance between the burden and the special talents. So for us, when we talk about it, in our enthusiasm about these special qualities, always keep in mind, like myself, I have ADHD, I use medication, etc., and it helps me. And so also to employers, it's good to tell about the burden of it, or the reasonable adjustments they can make. I coach a lot of people with special brains, and I have some models of good practice. We are trying to convince these large employers, Axo Nobel, I think many of you will know the name. We work for KLM, etc., and also a Dutch healthcare insurer. So we are at the right place, because healthcare insurers are, of course, very important in the discourse about special brains. And this healthcare insurer hires us, my company, to coach their people with ADHD, Tourette, autism, etc. And they do it even when someone starts there and has only been working there for 3 months. As soon as they see, something's the matter here, they call in a coach and help, join them in to help and coach this employee. So very important to realize that. The model I often present to employers, because maybe you know the English expression, you have to talk into someone's listening. Well, this is talking into the listening of people in organizations, organization advisors, HR workers. Many of them know one of these team role theories, and the Belbin team roles are very well known. And if they don't, well, you can show them this picture. I do. And as you can see, this is the idea of Belbin is that every team has to have the right mix of people, and you need people who are very precise, people who have endurance, people who are specialists in a certain area, etc. And if you compare this Belbin from 1981, who didn't have no clue about special brains, let alone autism or ADHD, Belbin formulated 2 types in his team role theory, that is the planned and the completer finisher. I invite you to read the Belbin team roles, and you will recognize here, mostly here, the people with autism. And here the planned, if you read this, planned the strengths and the weaknesses. A planned is creative, inventive, has new ideas, suggestions, is outgoing and is enthusiastic, and tackles complex problems in new ways. This is what Belbin said in 1998 or whatever, the beginning of the 80s. And the weaknesses, especially over-optimistic, I recognize that myself, losing interest once the initial enthusiasm has passed, typically ADHD, and forgetfulness. Well, I won't bother you with all my problems with forgetfulness. I manage, but, and I recognize it in many clients and other people with ADHD I talk with. So it's important to talk into the listening of managers, HR advisors, supervisors, etc. And then they are, in my experience, they are very open to apply reasonable adjustments, pay for the coaching, for the job coach, etc. So that's a very important thing to realize. While you talk into their listening, try to influence their discourse and try to, as I said, make them clear that these people, this 10%, are there for a reason in your company or in your local government or at the national police or whatever I've been running around. And so this is what my message is for today. And this is how we can influence the European and in fact worldwide paradigm shift we do so much want amongst employers. So if there's a question, I am open to answer the question, or otherwise pass on the word to Colman. And
thanks very much, Hans. Thank you very much for that fascinating presentation.